Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, welcome to Rapyd. It's just wonderful to have at least face-to-face, in-person meetup like this. It's been a while. So welcome to Rapyd. And again, thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. Appreciate that. Today, Mohandass and I are going to talk about there's a world beyond cards, and actually why is it important in this part of the world. And also, this is the exact same topic we did on Monday. So we received a couple of feedback, and one of the things was actually there's a fabulous feedback about actually the love he's sharing. So today we're going to just focus on mobile interactive sharing, because I think coming from horse's mouth, like the practitioners and what the difficulties he went through, obviously merchants they went through, I think we're going to spend more time on that. But I'm going to key it up with a few slides as to why it's important, and then we're just going to go deep dive into that. Okay. So again, I just want to get to many people are more interested in knowing who he is. So I'll give you a brief background, and he can talk about, I think, a little bit more about himself. And so he started with part of Singapore police force, worked at the Prime Minister office, and then bank internship, and then management consultant at BCG, led the strategy group in Grab. Now you're doing your own in a startup. So what are the common thread that is actually ties all that together? I think let's start with that.
Yeah, guys, thanks all for coming down today. It's actually really nice to see people. I think like what Tom was saying about the feedback from the last session was, less slides, more chatting, more dialogue, more conversation. So we'll strive for that. So I think the common thread in all those things, it does seem like a lot of random things that I did, but I think the common thread was kind of finding my passion and finding what I wanted to do. I think the best way to kind of think of myself is almost like my own little startup. And along the way in my career and my journey is finding that product market fit. So for me, it's like when I try something and it doesn't work out, or I don't feel like it's the best thing that I could do, I don't wait like 2 years because it looks bad on my resume to move on. It's kind of like failing fast, reiterating quickly, finding the next best thing. So like Tom said, I started my career really in policy. So I was in the Prime Minister's office, found that public policy was just a bit too much of a long frame perspective for me. I like to see action, a bit more on the short term. So I left that, went to BCG. I really liked it. I liked the experience there. But then again, I did find myself kind of being on the outside. Felt a bit of FOMO, because like I'll do the work and other people will take credit for it. So I was like, shit, okay, that's not going to work out for me in the long term as well. Felt better product market fit as I went to Grab. So then I did corporate strat. I spent 50% of my time really in the payment space. So I did payments, I did strategy, did insurance, lending. Even before I left, we did that digibanking license application. So it's good to see the results recently. But then again, I think part of it was like, even though the product market fit was strong at Grab, I think Grab has still a very strong consumer DNA. And by the time I ended my time at Grab, I just found that I was more of a B2B person. I liked solving companies' problems as compared to consumers' problems. I did find that finance problems were interesting to me. And that's why I started Spenmo, together with my co-founder.
Oh, that's fantastic. Some people find lifetime to find what they want. It just took you a little bit of journey, but I think you got there. So again, these presentations is available. So just ping me, I'll send it to you directly, all right? But I'm just gonna skip most of them. As I said, I think from the last feedback, I think it's just, but I'm just gonna tee it up though. So while we're talking about why we gather here today, right? It's basically, this chart will actually explains just about everything. So this bubble represents the growth size of an e-commerce market throughout the world. But what is different is that actually when you look at the blue circles, and these are blue borders are actually, we call it internationalized payment, which is actually a very homogeneous payment culture. So one country to another is very similar, right? So most of them pay credit card. Obviously, some people use PayPal in this part of the world, and then probably bank transfer in Europe. That's most common. But what is fascinating is when you look at our part of the world in Asia, every country by country has their own unique payment culture. It's very domestic driven, right? So in the other world, if you want to be able to expand this part of the world, you're actually able to understand every single local market independently to integrate. That's the challenge, right? And why does it matter so much now too? By 2023, we expect literally 80% of e-commerce will take place in this part of the world, where payment culture is by country is very unique. Not much similarity between these countries. And in fact, there's not much in terms of technical synergy they're creating from one country to another, right? That's why in this part of the world, it has to go world beyond cards, right? You need to looking into different payment methods. So very high level. In fact, 70% of online shoppers in this part of the world do not use credit card, right? As you can see here, 19% still use cash, although many government has to try to have the cashless society, but still 19%. 35% is a bank transfer, I think local debit schemes and ATM, and 17% in e-wallet. I think that number was rise year by year because you're seeing the rise emergence of a digital wallets out here in this part of the world, right? So again, go a little bit deeper. This is a study that we conducted back in April. Again, this research is available on our website. It's downloadable, right? And so here, when you look at this left-hand side, we call it Japan and Taiwan considered mature payment markets, right? So in that part of the world, actually more than 60% of people actually use credit card. That's their most preferred payment methods, just like in other international markets we see. When you go to the right, you can see dramatic decrease in terms of credit card usage, right? In fact, most massive growth market here, India and Thailand, Indonesia. In fact, Indonesia is actually less than 10% credit card penetration. So if you want to operate in this business and you want to expand to this part of the world, you got to think beyond simple credit cards, right? And then what is it? Then what replaced it? You know, again, first, I think people would think, oh, it got to be cash because people are still very considerate. But when you look at the top, that yellow is representing cash. Actually, cash did not replace it. Actually, what has replaced was a digital wallet, which is a light blue, and the purple was a bank transfer, the emergence of e-wallet. So we know Alipay, WeChat, but in this part of the world, GrabPay. When you go to Indonesia, you got Uvo and GoPay, GCash in Philippines, right? In a Touch 'n Go in Malaysia. So just to name a few, a Paytm in India, right? These are actually taking over significant shares away in the marketplace. And another thing that is emerging very strongly is actually bank transfer. I know it's not familiar for many international crowds, but bank transfer here right now become real fast, actually real time, and very, very, very cheap, right? So we have all these acronyms, right? We got Pay Now Fast, Prompt Pay, UPI, MPP, right? All these are acronyms actually real-time payment network that is each country actually is implemented. So it's extremely cheap, and also very interesting phenomenon during this COVID crisis actually. Many of the customers, consumers, they realize that bank transfer is actually most cost-effective to the merchants. So they're struggling, merchants are struggling. So by themselves, try to find the proper, most cost-effective, I think, payment method to help our merchants. That's why we see that here quite often in Singapore, right? So when you go to many of the stores now, we see Pay Now decals, QR code for us to represent, right? In fact, UPI in India is mind-boggling. From 2016, we've been experiencing more than per annum, 570% growth per annum until now. By 2025, they expected $1.7 trillion to go through that platform, right? So in this part of the world, I'm gonna re-emphasize it, it has to go beyond credit card. You need to understand bank transfer. You need to understand credit card. Also, obviously, you need to understand some cash, right? And all these digital wallets that come to play, right? But now I think we're just gonna go more into, I think, now that kind of tees it up for you guys. And so the challenges that we have, right? So instead of just us continue to showing slides, I think I'm just gonna directly dive in with the Mohandass, right? So for the crowd's sake, so first of all, explain briefly like what does Spenmo do? Why did you find that company? What's the purpose for that company?
Yeah, I think the genesis of Spenmo was really from my time at Grab. I was launching the GrabPay wallet for a lot of the merchants in Malaysia and Vietnam. And the feedback from these SMBs and merchants were like, hey, GrabPay wallet is okay, I can accept a QR code payment, nice. But there's a lot of other financial operations within my company that the GrabPay wallet doesn't satisfy. I need to pay my payroll, I need to pay my supplier. You require me to kind of withdraw from my GrabPay wallet into my bank account, and I have to do all those things manually. So that's sort of what we found. As we kind of went through Spenmo, right? We just found that payment and financial information was all over the place. SMBs were using 10 plus different tools and applications, right? To manage the entire payment stack, right? And when I talk about payment stack, there's really three things that we kind of look at. Money in, right? Your accounts receivables. You're receiving it from multiple sources, you're doing multiple applications. Something that typically people forget about, this intra-company approvals, right? I think as a consumer, it's very easy, right? I get an invoice, I get a bill, I'm the only guy who makes a decision and I pay it out. But when a company receives a bill, we've worked with companies, even SMBs, that have 7 layers of approval before it gets paid out. And these guys don't use software, man. They use email threads and WhatsApp threads and CC this guy, CC the CFO, wait for the okay before it gets even to a payment ledger, right?
Yeah.
And we found that was super, I was wondering why people were doing that. It was taking so much bandwidth from them. And on the AP side, there's multiple things you have to pay, right? On cards, on local bank transfers, and basically overseas remittance as well. So interestingly, one of the reasons why I agreed to do this topic with Tom was Spenmo itself, when we started, we are purely a card company for businesses. And over time, we realized that we had to almost diversify away just from the cards play, because as compared to the US, a lot of B2B transactions here are not done on cards. A lot of the merchants and suppliers that you actually want to pay, they'll be like, hey, I don't have a POS terminal. I don't have a payment gateway. I don't want to accept card payments. Here's my bank account number. Transfer it to me. So that's sort of our own genesis, right? And what Spenmo does today is really building a new category of software, which is a cloud payment software that kind of centralizes all these things, your AR, your intra-company, your AP, the ability to actually get all these approvals, pay it out seamlessly, and kind of go straight into your accounting software. That's what we want to do. Take bandwidth away from finance teams who are sort of becoming the manual aggregators of all these different software, applications, WhatsApp threads, and email threads, and present them one dashboard that tells them money in, money out, and reconcile directly to accounting software. That's what we're trying to build.
So, obviously, we just talked about the latest trend, right? And also build the platform to solve that issue, right? But at the same time, let's assume that one of the SME merchants is here.
Yeah.
And then obviously, for your experience and also for your company, how do they scope with this? Is that every day, ever-changing, the latest method that comes to the surface and the myth becomes irrelevant?
I think for us, one of the things that we found, especially this year, right, with the pandemic, a lot of people were finding that, they had to almost think beyond Singapore. Singapore is a really small market for any SMB. Yeah. If you do retail, if you do F&B, you have to be local. But if you kind of do e-commerce, if you do any sort of software business, almost from day one, you need to be thinking about how I'd go beyond Singapore, right? And going beyond Singapore means selling to an international set of customers. And if you serve an international set of customers, it means almost accepting many different forms of payment methods, right? So I think that's something that SMBs we found that we want to talk to. They struggle a bit. They're like, hey, I focused on Singapore the last couple of years. I want to kind of branch out. My service could go to Indonesia, Malaysia, but my payment stack is not evolved to accept payments from there. How do I kind of solve it?
Let's go on that. Let's elaborate on further, right? So that they just knocked on the door. I go, Mohammed, I have this issue. I want to go to Indonesia. Obviously, I think COVID has changed a lot of things, right? I just mentioned, you realize I cannot be just domestic. I need to be cannot be a brick and mortar, right? I need to be online presence. In fact, being an online presence allows you to actually reach out to the regions that never actually expected in the past, right? So you kind of widen it, right? But what would be the first advice? When they come into you, knock on the door, I want to go online, right? I want to be able to expand to serve Indonesia, Malaysia, and Philippines, right?
Yeah.
So what would be practical advice?
I think first, we will obviously recommend them to kind of use us. It's not a sales pitch for Spenmo, but, we'll be like, hey, if you want to accept payments, you find a good payment provider. We obviously work at Rapyd, you guys as well, right? But I think they need to kind of think internationally from day one. We find that they really struggle to understand the concept that their service can go beyond Singapore.
Yeah.
And it's something that they struggle with, from day one.
Yeah. I think for my take is I think a lot of people try to reinvent the wheels, right? Because I think tech stacks is already available. Right? Spenmo's, I think tech stacks and software, Rapyd stacks is already available. I think for me, for SMEs, just understand what's available. Don't invent the wheel. Just try to understand what will serve them. And also go to market, I think will be the key, right? And then also for your personal experience, you started your company, and now you're also expanding internationally. Right?
Yeah.
So what was the biggest hurdle and pain point for you in the beginning?
I think one of the big things that we found, obviously when you start a startup, you're very ambitious. You think you want to do everything. Yeah. And then kind of reality hits when you find out that, hey, I don't have that much resources. I need to focus on customer pain points, right? I think this is when we kind of found out that Spenmo and Rapyd, you can kind of put them in the same category of software, which is, sort of fintechs, right? But we're fundamentally two different kind of fintechs. Yeah. Rapyd is more of an infrastructure fintech, right? They power guys like us, which is more of a customer-facing fintech, right? We go deeper into the company, we get into the nitty-gritty stuff of how their finance teams form. And I think once you kind of get that, differentiation, then you can kind of focus, right? For an infrastructure fintech, then the focus is on getting as many pipes as possible. getting partnerships with banks, getting partnerships with like payout methods, and just being as diverse as possible, right? And for us, it was a bit different. If we had tried to do both those things, being customer facing and trying to build the infrastructure on our own, I think we would have lost focus very fast because fundamentally they're two different forms of business.
Yeah. And also, I think I just mentioned all these different methods. And also, it's changing. That, I think, preference, I think sometimes quarterly, 6 months, the most preferred digital wallet all of a sudden disappeared and then some competitors take that place, right? It's constantly changing that environment, right? Then, again, for me, how do you, as, again, SME, sitting there, try to actually get my hands around this changing landscape, yet able to focus on your core business?
Yeah, I think that's something that's hard. I think one of the reasons why Spenmo's around is because we found that the typical SMB, right? Yeah. They don't really have a big engineering team. They don't really have a CTO, right? So a lot of payment gateway software almost presumes that you have technical talent within your SMB, right? To work with those APIs.
Correct, yeah.
So we said, hey, what happens if we could do like a no-code solution, right? Where you have a no-code page to accept payments, a no-code page to automate your payouts. That would be more interesting. So that's something that we focus on today, the ability to kind of be as simple as possible, because you can't take an SMB that's been kind of doing sort of like cash payments and like manual payouts and suddenly say, hey, dude, take my API, start building.
Right.
It's too much of a step. And I think this is something that we kind of found, especially this year, as we started working closely with IMD and the Singapore government on the PEPL and e-invoicing. Kind of asking them to go from sending invoices from WhatsApp threads and email threads directly onto PEPL is just like a step too far.
Right.
You need to have almost like baby steps along the way where you say, hey, use this one platform, right? No PEPL, everything. You just attach it the same way. Instead of using email thread, you attach it with us. We will pay it out for you. And then eventually bringing them onto more advanced stages of like, technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, most of us who work in the payment industry, ultimately our goal is the payment to be invisible, right? And that actually not part of it. We want SME to don't think about the payment, that actually everything will be smooth and seamlessly integrated, that actually takes place, right? And I think with that said, I think I'm going to just quickly, I'm going to ask anybody has a question now. That again, I want this to be more interactive. I think last session was, much more, was productive because the people were asking questions, were able to answer. I think that instead of just me presenting those 20 slides.
No, he has 50 actually. So if you guys don't ask questions, he'll go through all of them.
Does anybody want to quickly ask a question? So, somebody has a mic? Can we get a mic?
No, I think it's okay. Am I audible?
Hey.
Does the mic work?
Yeah, mic's on.
So, so with the recent announcement from the MAS that they're opening up Fast and Pay Now to non-bank or non-financial institutions, so what kind of conversations or thoughts has that triggered within Spenmo on how your potential customers might use these to replace processes that they're following now, which are probably more manual? So yeah, that's my question.
I think one of it that we found is that even the average, simple SMB has multiple bank accounts, and there's not really one interface where they kind of click in and say like, hey, this are all my balances from all my bank accounts, this is all how everything is syncing, right? So obviously with that, the ability to kind of link your bank accounts directly to one interface that shows you all these real-time balances and actually start processing payments from there, that would be pretty powerful. Yeah. It's something that people want, and we found, before I started Spenmo, I actually shadowed a lot of these SMB owners just to figure out what the hell they did in the day, right? Like how are they doing payments? Like how is their finance being done? And they will log in individually. They have a separate bank account for merchants, separate bank account for payroll. Nothing was synced. They were kind of being the manual aggregator in that sense.
So it's a manual input. Basically, I think many of the merchants that we deal with, what I find out is that they get this invoice and either get a PDF or actually paper invoice to the email. And then there's a payment instruction. So the finance team goes offline and they log into their bank portal and then type in whatever the invoice number that is, and they send the money. So everything's right now. There's a lot of opportunity to make there's an error that could occur, right? And this is a manual process. You have to have a full staff of finance team just go through that if you have 100 invoices higher per day, right?
Yeah.
But these, again, could be integrated very straightforward because now, think about it, it's a reality today is that you can send an invoice with the embedded link, and in fact, you can embed a QR code as well. So moment arrived, the finance team can actually scan the QR code and pay it, and that invoice is linked to that exact payment. So behind the scene, okay, you can reconcile it too, so that they see exactly happening, something that you took 2 hours, now you could do that in 20 seconds, right? I think that's how the changes that integrated I think finance is, I think, in the future, right?
No, I think there's something that's interesting, right? So we've tried to pitch this to SMBs.
Yeah.
I think they understand it in theory, but when you pitch to a finance guy that we can automate his job, he gets scared. So we tell him dude, Spenmo and Rapyd, we don't want to replace you. We want to make sure that you're spending higher quality of your time doing things that software can't do, which is not pushing payments and reconciliation, which is kind of looking at where the company is spending, thinking about how you can procure better, how can you spend better, how can you spend less, right?
Yeah.
Those are things that we have to educate them that, hey, we're not going to replace you. You're going to be there. You're just going to be doing different things that's better for your business.
Yeah.
But that's a scary thing, The first time we pitch, I think I had a bad idea to pitch on hey, saving all this time and hit count. And they were like, dude, no, I'm not going to show my boss. So we're like, okay, let's not pitch that angle anymore.
All right. Any other questions?
So I guess the partnership with banks is pretty critical to you. How do you find that?
To me?
Well, I guess.
I guess
yeah.
both of us.
Okay.
You can
Because
go
in a way,
ahead.
you both need.
A partnership bank is definitely critical, right? I think at the same time, we also both realize there's a synergy between both of us, right? I think, again, I talked about this in Monday session. There's a FinTech 1.0. I think FinTech people we're going to eat these bankers alive, right? That was the being hostile approach to it. FinTech 2.0, they finally realized we need to collaborate. Now we're at stage 3.0. Now not only collaborate, but actually active participation from the bank. The banks, when you look at them, especially global bank, the infrastructure built in a large notional, low frequency transactions. So they still use the SWIFT network to actually send money across the border, right? But once money gets to that particular country, when the B2B sees it collapse, somebody would need to push out the money, and again, locally preferred way. It could be cash, it could be pushing to their debit card, it could be pushing to their local digital wallet. The last mile hasn't been built by the bank. It will never, actually their tech stack is never ready, right? So now they know that limitation. So now they're actively working with us to build that. So for me, ultimately for the user experience to be seamless, and us in the behind the scenes still relying on banking network and partnership, and then actually make the whole journey from invoice all the way to pay to those merchant in a suburban area in Indonesia get to pay in his or her own preferred ways, right?
I think I agree with Tom as well. We see banks as a necessary part of the ecosystem that we kind of work with. But instead of working with them directly, we rely on Tom to work with them, and we work with Tom. Because for us, it's again, sort of we have limited resources. We need to focus on customers. This chats with bankers, can be long and a bit tedious, right, Tom?
Yeah, I'm from there.
So, I think that's the way we kind of see it, right? So, we don't replace banking software. Spenmo, sort of like cloud payment software, is in the middle of your bank account and your accounting software. That's what we focus on. Embed it within your company in the way that you want to receive money and set those rules on how you want to pay out as efficiently as possible.
Correct. I mean, a lot of people don't, I think, assume that banks is just simply too slow, not able to innovate. But actually, it's not the case. You need to understand some of the friction is intended by them. Right? So you need to have that conversation. Is it intended friction because they want to sit on your floor for 2 days without paying your interest, right? Because those are things I think you can actually, me coming from the banking side, able to have that conversation with the bank. So is it intended? Then we need to find out why. How can we compensate that, right? Because I think if you think about it, without creating that win-win from both parties, you're just never gonna go next step. You end up as a fintech company do nothing but POC and demo, and that's a waste of money and waste of time, right? Any other questions? Again, you don't get that many opportunities to pick a brain of a guy who just started a startup.
I mean, my usual rate is $1,000 per hour, so you can find me on an expert network.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just throw it out there. I'm just wondering, for both Rapyd and Spenmo, if you could sort of just say, what do you think is the biggest threat to your business model? Because in some way you guys are disruptors, but how can these disruptors get disrupted, right? So just throwing it out there.
I'm gonna be a very MBA cliche to that. Biggest threat is our inability to innovate, right? And so I think sometimes when you get to critical stage, I think Rapyd now became a unicorn, and I think the valuation, I think the prominence is there. And the moment we stop to innovate, the moment we stop working with startups of Spenmo nature, that who brings the latest idea, we simply just kind of focus on an existing client base. I think that's what for me is the biggest threat. right? And then obviously there will be, again, the innovation happens, like, that's not gonna stop. And so for me, there will be a competitor, there will be someone who better, but again, it's going to make this ecosystem better, right? So to me, instead of afraid, I think for us is foremost internally, when we're looking at this problem and a Spenmo brings, other startup companies bring to us, we actually sit and think through together, right? That's for us is key.
Yeah, I think for us, we're obviously like a much earlier stage startup than Rapyd. I think our biggest, threat is basically, we're focusing on SMB space, and the SMB space is very broad. So you almost run the risk of building something that kind of appeals to everyone, but not really being critical to their daily operations, right? So imagine like, logistics SMB will have different payment and finance needs from a retail SMB, right? Different from like a, supply chain SMB. And, we almost had to pick those things very, very carefully. We just become a very generalist software that, doesn't cater to their particular industry needs. So I think that's the biggest one we had to sort of focus. Now we focus a lot on like e-commerce, marketplace, supply chain, logistics. Those things do well, those industry companies do quite well with us. But again, it's like we don't focus and we kind of build too quickly for like a generic SMB. I think we're in trouble.
Hi there. So I thought it was very interesting on the previous chart by country. When you looked at markets like Indonesia, I was shocked about the size of bank transfer versus e-wallet, right?
Yeah.
And I think in the past in Southeast Asia, you've seen a lot of incentives to use wallet, like GrabPay, right? You get points.
Yeah.
OVO, similar, GoPay, etc. But are we seeing like consumer behavior change in terms of like, to what extent is our consumers in Southeast Asia influenced by those incentives now? Especially given as like we're seeing less subsidies in the market, or is that trend now going where we expect that to like bank transfer, that purple chart, to increase?
Okay, so I think bank transfer by definition I think this part of the world and many of the countries are already on a real-time payment network, right? And so cost is going to be very minimal. I think that will continue to incentivize both merchants. Again, as I mentioned, I think some of the consumers, because I wanted to actually help out the merchants, I think that will continue to increase, right? And also in the wallets, yes, customer acquisition costs have been historically high. But also same time, many countries, including Singapore, Thailand, and Indonesia, right? So Indonesia, for example, QRIS, they're creating this interoperability of QR codes, right? Prompt is already interoperable, right? Singapore, we do have a SG QR code, but obviously in the back end, we have to settle differently, right? But these are the things that I think moving forward, I think infrastructure is being laid there, making it much easier from the merchant to able to use this as a form of payment they want to receive, right? Because everything is operable. Then I think that, and also in the future, only missing part is, think about it. If everything's real time in each country, Singapore, Pay Now, Thailand, Prompt Pay. We just heard the news a couple days ago, then announced by MAS, right? So that was actually old news about a year ago. But now they're going to be much more active connecting Prompt Pay and Pay Now cross-border. So when you close the dot, right now, we all know sending our money overseas, right? Lack of transparency, a lot of lifting fee in a corresponding bank we have no visibility to, right? And then also time, right? Sometimes it takes 3 days, right? But when you think about the world that actually Prompt Pay and Pay Now is connected, and both are real-time basis, right? And then all of a sudden I send something here, and a true money wallet is reflected instantaneously.
Makes sense. I mean, just to add on to what Tom said, if you kind of look at this segment, right? I'm almost going to take a bet that 90% or 90% plus of that is debit cards. A small majority of that is like credit cards. And I think in a country like Singapore, e-wallets, like you said, is very subsidy driven. I know I have a lot of friends who just top up to get, basically double dip in credit card rewards and GrabPay rewards. They get super happy about it, which is obviously not sustainable, right? Because, I don't think, to be frankly honest, I don't think the GrabPay wallet is solving a very big pain point in Singapore. But if you kind of go outward from Singapore, you go into more emerging markets, the e-wallet that we see is almost always the first pseudo bank account that a lot of these consumers have. Is their gateway to kind of purchasing things online. Because they go top up at an Alphamart or a convenience store. That's their access to basically the rest of the world, right? And to me, that's interesting. So that part of the e-wallet segment where is your pseudo bank account, it's your first thing to like basically buy things online, that's super interesting.
Well,
bank transfers, I mean, my bet, we are a Singapore-focused business. I think Pay Now will take off. I think it will be big. A lot of merchants are waking up to the idea that, hey, this card guys are kind of ripping me off for like 2+3%. I can kind of do away with that and maybe get a flat rate of 50 cents, right? And it's easy enough for the consumer, why not? So I think Pay Now would be quite big in Singapore. And at least we are banking on that. So we're hoping for it.
Absolutely. I think, again, on top of that, there's a government, I think, regulators' perspective, they do have that incentive to provide that financial, I think, the education and freedom by providing through the wallet, right? Because of that most of them in underserved, unbanked people population in Indonesia and Philippines, and I think they're also incentive from regulator perspective, I think, to build that wallet. So I think it's definitely here to stay. I think it'll rise. I think it will increase dramatically in coming years. And then cards obviously see that threat, right? Again, cards not going to go away. Cards that threat. So they're coming up with different ways to actually utilize the already existing card network, right? Okay.
So I know Spenmo looks at more B2B, but my question is more on B2C. How do you think about the proportion of underbanked people or people who do not have access to banking facilities in some of the Southeast Asia countries?
Can you go ahead?
Okay, so B2C in terms of how the companies like us would be there to serve, or you just talk about overall landscape of under?
Talk about development of bank transfers.
Okay.
How about people who don't have access to a bank account
Yeah.
and still prefer to pay by cash?
Yeah. And so right now, the most basic infrastructure that is in place in this part of the world is actually people do use cash. So they're walking the cash with the Alphamart, or here in Singapore, in fact, our infrastructure allow you to go into 7-Eleven and actually pay your goods that you purchase online. And also, actually, you can withdraw money from that too. If I can push the money to you, to your so-called digital wallet that you have, and you'll be able to take that, the digital wallet and the authorization code, walk into 7-Eleven, and the cashier will going to scan that or type in their keypads, and they see that it's you, that they owe you $50, they'll give you the $50. So they have that basic infrastructure. Indonesia has it, Philippines has it, and then Malaysia has it. I know we have it in Singapore, right? So that's there, right? But I think, again, incentive is to continue to, I think, liberal, it's like the usage of it, right? For the first time, when you want to go shopping in Amazon in the past, unless you have a credit card, you couldn't shop. You couldn't shop in the Shoppies. But now, when you go to Philippines, you'll see as a part of the payment method, you'll see GCash, you have Paymaya. Then you can also Cebuana. Then you have all these local payment methods will be as a part of the checkout page. That's what I said at the very beginning. That will be the challenge for the most of the merchants, right? How do I know what is the most preferred method in each country? And how do I know it's such an ever-changing this behavior of a consumer that every 6 months they could have a different preferred method, right? I think that's a challenge that SME face, and that's why you have to go think beyond. I mean, now you got to do a little bit of pitch of Rapyd. That's what we do, right? We build that infrastructure on behalf of our SMEs and our large merchants, the enterprise merchants, right? So you don't have to do that connectivity one by one, right? We do that. And we create that, so that's the reason we create the global largest payment network. We offer about, as of today, I think 900 plus different payment methods in 100 different countries. We accept 50 different wallets, right? Well, obviously we issue cards, but again, that's the platform we created for you guys to take advantage on top of it, so that you don't have to do that, and you don't have to worry about it. You're just getting a free option. So you plug in with us, a single API, and a B2B infrastructure build-wise, and then you change as 6 months later, okay, Tom, that payment method in Indonesia didn't work. Can you turn it off? Let's try this one.
I think just to add on to what Tom said, I think a lot of what merchants want to accept and the payment methods they want to accept are largely driven by the consumer, right? Consumer is king. If they have the understanding that consumers only have this payment methods available to them, they only have cash, but you want to do digital, you will work with like an Alphamart convenience store to accept top-ups from that, right? You're almost driven that way. But in terms of like underbanked consumers in the rest of Southeast Asia, I think Singapore's actually, we can kind of bypass it, right? Singapore's a bit of an outlier in Southeast Asia itself. When you kind of look at those stats in terms of underbanked, I think almost, if you kind of look at some of the stats of the gig economy, right? I think by 2025, 40% of the labor force will be gig economy workers. That means they don't have a regular employer on record who's basically paying them a wage, right? So if you're able to kind of take over these marketplaces that are controlling gig economies and basically forcing them to sign up for some sort of a bank account where they get paid, you get to drive them away from cash into getting money in a digital method. So I think that's actually something the government should probably work on, which is if I can force them to accept their wages in a certain digital method and not cash, then they're most likely to stick with that method and spend and consume using digital e-wallets as well.
Correct. And again, just before I hand it over to the next question, this is, for me, is a fascinating number. This is obviously anybody in e-commerce will read this report annually, that report that's generated by Google and Temasek and Bain. And this year alone, 40 million new people in Southeast Asia done the shopping for the first time online. So that trend, you think that will slow down? I don't think so, given what we had gone through the COVID. I think this will accelerate. These numbers will rise, right? So we'll continue to see new underbanked, underserved people coming into line and shopping for online for the first time.
Tom, you talked about like combining the different e-wallets across Southeast Asia, specifically because in Singapore. Is the use of fiat currency as a payment method a challenge to the payment business that you guys are in? Because, I mean, it started off a couple of years back in Singapore, but hasn't really taken off. Some talks about it that this time around, cryptocurrencies or fiat currencies might be a bit different in the way it's being utilized. So the question I have is, do you see that as a threat or an opportunity then?
For us, is again, even the crypto is at the end of the day, it's a one crypto to another that has exchange has take place, right? So it's an exchange. It's no different than one currency to another currency, right? So underneath the building infrastructure for that, serving that purpose, I think that's not a problem. And also, you'll see a lot of crypto companies in that actually, even those companies, right? They need some way to top up their wallet. And then with that money, they buy crypto or trade currency. And once you make some money or lose some money, they need to cash out. So they need to also need to off-ramp as well, right? So to me, this always exists. In fact, if their ecosystem go bigger, our ability to help them top up and off-ramp will be, I think, proportionally increase as well, right? And also, let's look at this crypto, I think, as again, you got to realize the game industry has been here for a long time. I'm talking about video games, right? So they use points and different, whatever credit system they use, right? So they've done it for a long time. Now today is represented in a particular coin, but in terms of me sending a credit and some, to buy some weapon in the game, and that's been in system more than 10 years, right? So again, it's a different expression, but ultimately I think on-ramp, off-ramp will continue to exist.
I mean, I think Tom will probably roll out Bitcoin and Rapyd probably next year, right? Like, that should come quite soon. No, but again, I think for us is a bit more, I'm not a Bitcoin expert by any means, but, to be honest, we've had a few companies that we've spoken to that asked us whether we help them pay their invoices via Bitcoin. And I'm like, seems like a bit of an edge case. We need to kind of focus on the core SMBs who are still struggling to digitize their invoices, right? Yeah. So I think there will always be sort of like early adopters in that space. But I think my guess is that before you get the majority of users and, for Bitcoin to become a backbone of B2B transaction, I think volatility needs to stop or it needs to be reduced, right? It needs to be a fairly stable currency where you don't see intraday 30% sort of declines. Yeah. I think it becomes very hard to trade, especially business transactions. Maybe consumers are willing to take it, but businesses wouldn't be able to kind of live with that sort of volatility.
Right. Again, this goes to our partnership with the banks too, right? I think there's definitely, having that relationship with the bank and their reluctance to actually diving into the crypto. So again, that's not going to be our top priority, right? But at the same time, we're looking at it every day.
Just curious to hear, what's your experience like dealing with regulators throughout Southeast Asia, and how do you get them on board to with your ideas and be very supportive of your growth?
I think regulator by definition, when you ask questions, they're going to be very proactive in their answer, right? So that's right. In terms of execution, obviously we're kind of spoiled being in Singapore with the MAS being very business focused, and they're willing to, I think, support and at least hear you out and actually work together, right? But that's not usually the case for the most of the country, right? So I think there are countries, again, when you talk to them one-on-one, they're very proactive. They want to listen to you. But in terms of, they always fail in terms of the execution piece. I think that's the frustration. But at the same time, again, we're seeing these kind of changes happening right now. So I think a lot of regulators will use this digital method to actually continue to, I think, support that, the ecosystem to be healthy.
I think MAS, obviously with the digibanking licenses, the first in the region, obviously Singapore is sort of the hotbed for that. They've kind of led the way in Southeast Asia. So I think we are quite thankful that we started here. I think Singapore is always a good place to kind of start a startup in Southeast Asia before you want to venture out into lesser known countries like Indo, where regulation is a bit murky, right? And I think for us, I think part of innovating in a fintech means breaking a few rules, not the big rules that will end up in jail, but you need to push, right? Because if you don't kind of take customer feedback, you don't take that innovation to the regulator and tell them, hey, this is what is happening now, this is how businesses want to be paid, this is how they want things to be done, they will never know. They're so far away from customers, right? So I think we almost have a duty in the startup community that deals with the customers to aggregate feedback and bring it to regulators and present to them. Yeah. I don't think we've ever seen a case where we went with like less evidence and we went with the necessary evidence and they were like, hey, no, we're never going to do it because it's just a flat no, right? Yeah. I think they also have to think about it from a balance of system perspective. Like the system has to be balanced, the system has to be safe, right? But then I think they're quite open.
Yeah, I concur. I think again, here we're again very spoiled, right? So we have a regulator who's willing to try with you, and actually able to push the envelope a little. And once you get to a certain lane, obviously they'll tell you too. But at least we're able to collaborate and partner with, I think, regulators. So I think we're very blessed in that point. That's why many startups actually do have a headquarters here in Singapore to get their business and launched. Right. Any other question? Again, so thank you so much for your time. And again, these presentations is available. Just ping me, I'll send the deck to you. And if you want me to actually go over one slide by slide, I'm more than happy to do so, right? So if you want to. And then also,
one-on-one session.
Another session, a one-on-one, I'll do that for you. Again, and also just feel free to just reach out to us anytime, right? So also we have this, instead of exchanging business card is not a new thing nowadays. So we have a QR code of our individual, our Rapyd speakers there. So just scan that. I think it's a LinkedIn profile, so please do so. And if it's not, if there's no more questions, and thank you again. I'm gonna wrap this up.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.